So 1994 is kind of the year that we've all been waiting for. We know that if I'm talking about black metal in 1994, it's going to sound like black metal. I've been talking about a lot of death metal, sort of working our way up to black death metal, and a lot of the melodic death metal of 1993 and how that broke around that time. And we know it's coming. There's going to be some black metal here, and there's going to be some stuff. But first, I think you. I don't know how many people need this context, but um, it's good to know that if you haven't listened to the first Mayhem record, the first Emperor record, the fourth Dark Throne record, the all these other groups in some time, I think it is worthwhile to go back and listen to those classics. At least the first four in there, just to get context as to what was exciting about black metal when it broke out, what was cool about it, and how some of the earlier bands had sort of started to flop. Like Samael, kind of, I think Ceremony of Opposites kind of sucks, but also there were some bands that were popping up like Ancient Rites and whatnot. They were kind of cool. They were going somewhere with it. So getting a sense for where 1994 landed, well, this is going to take a while because there's going to be at least, I would say, at least 30 records I'm going to have to cover. A lot of them demos from 1994 that will show a lot of new bands cropping up to participate in black metal. But there were some bands that I think were already standing out. Some of my favorites overall. It's just I have to name some of these just so you get a sense for my taste. So when I'm talking about melodic black metal, you kind of understand like how that shaped my taste. Enslaved Frost is a classic. I think Necromass's debut is great. I love the second record too. Eosphoros from Thou Art Lord I really love that record. It's got a drum machine, but you got to like that from that time period in Hellenic black metal. Abigor's debut, a little bit more musty and staggered than their next couple records, but a really ambitious record to start that I really enjoy for all of its warts and all that. And for the Bathory-esque debut from Hades is still notable. Now, of course, I have to mention Mortuary Drape. I love that band, and I think it's important. I also think Behemoth's demos are pretty cool. So basically, we're going to be talking about Swedish music for primarily this entry. Not only because I don't have an exact date for a lot of these demos and I wanted to talk about them first, but because a lot of the really good stuff happening early in the year in 1994 happened to be Swedish. So a lot of this, there'll just be like 3 releases out of the total 9 that are Swedish. So you got to understand, some of these, we'll just get there and you'll see what I'm talking about. The first one up is Octonomos. This is Fredrik Soderlund's kind of main project after a while. It began as a duo, and the vocalist from Algaion was actually in the band for the first 2 demos. One of them never released. Not sure why that happened. Maybe it sounded like shit. But remember, we heard the first demo from Algaion on the last part. So you'll notice that this is the same vocalist and the production values are similar for this project. Now, the main reason that I present this is because I was struck by the strong melodic values in Fredrik Soderlund's guitar work. That is clearly his focus. He's done well to arrange these songs with keyboards at opportune points. Clearly, he'd at least heard Emperor and probably some other basic sort of 92 to 93 black metal, but his riff style is very sophisticated for what it was, and I think that there's more than like just Satyricon in there, I think, overall. So I think it's worth mentioning. There's a lot of trivia in here. There's a lot of interesting things to throw about talking about Octonomos. And I think maybe the most interesting one to people in the United States is that they were one of the early sort of signings or distro opportunities from Full Moon Productions. And that is I believe always Florida-based black metal label that really brought pure underground over from 1994 through at least 2009, 2010, something like that. And so this was one of their early releases, co-released by Soderlund's own kind of label. And, we could go down a rabbit hole with the trivia there. But basically, when you listen to this, I guess I would encourage you to listen to the whole thing and pay attention to his guitar style. And note that, again, the production values are similar to what Algaion was managing, but certainly more clear and much more sophisticated songwriting. We don't have the first demo tape from Ventureland, A Castle So Crystal Clear, because it's not available online and I'm not sure where I would access it. So we start with It's Here I Belong. And this is probably more of an interesting conversation piece otherwise, not only because this band would be later appear on No Fashion's roster in 1996 for their classic debut, classic in hindsight debut, but because some of these songs would be reworked and featured there. I think otherwise it's clear that this is a ambitious and sophisticated band in terms of the guitarist, but most of it's not up to standard here. We hear a little bit of Bathory, we hear a little bit of some of their peers in their work, but overall, this is you're really going to have to press your ear very hard to this record to hear any nuance or any of the real plus sides to the guitar work. They are there, and this is a strong preamble for what they would accomplish with their full length, but it would take some time for them to get there. I think otherwise, the interesting thing about this record is that it includes a couple of folks who would feature in Maze of Torment. I would really recommend that you listen to The Force, the debut full-length album from Maze of Torment. I think also the Harmony demos were pretty interesting too. If you're a fan of melodic black death metal, The Force, it stands out in their discography, which is mostly death thrash metal in a very blunt style. Otherwise, one of these members would go on to play in black and roll band Alpha Hane, and that's not interesting for our discussion, but they did eventually go on to other projects overall, and we'll talk more about this band when their full length shows up. The most exciting demo tape to talk about this time around is probably Cetherial's A Hail to the Faceless Angels, and thankfully this one is pretty well documented. The sound quality was pretty good, and we have evidence of the band calling themselves cold melodic death metal from the Land of Frost. And so for $5 you could have bought this tape from Mr. Shioden, and that would have been a great investment because this is one of the more developed and complete sounding demo tapes from this time, and it shows a very prime example of Swedish melodic black death metal. And I would say it'll be obvious why I added death metal in there once we get to the third or so song and they start to dip into a couple of death metal deicide influenced riffs, and that isn't quite their style going forward, but there are some big death metal moments on this record. And this is the guy behind In Battle. He was a founding member of that band, and you could tell he loved death metal based on all of his projects early on. But there's also some other people on this tape. This was recorded as a quintet, and so it includes the vocalist from Midwinter's first and only LP. It also features the drummer from Blotmine, Sorhin, and many other bands from the time, who is just a fantastic drummer who really helped shape the sound for this portion of the scene, and should be commended for his performances on even just this demo, but also Nord, which we'll talk about later. But Cetherial is a band people often overlook as a melodic black metal band because they were a little bit more straightforward in kind of a Dark Funeral kind of style after a while, because some of these members left to do their own thing otherwise. So let's at least let the history books show that this was certainly a melodic black metal band from the Land of Frost. Now we could argue whether or not Isvind should be a primary melodic black metal band, but I find it very hard to argue against that fact when I've sat with their demos and their first couple of albums, because they always carried with them a real strong sense of melody that was very different from their peers. Yes, we can hear the Dark Throne and whatnot and the mayhem in their style. You could see that where they were getting some of their phrasing techniques and some of their just finger techniques in general and how to play black metal, but These are actually fairly sophisticated melodic black metal riffs that develop on this demo. This is their, I think, second or third demo. And it's pretty rough in sound, but clear enough to tell what's going on. And I really just appreciate the guitar work. I think it's the strongest thing about this band in general. And if this isn't impressive, hold on. I'll talk about at least their next two releases. I think those will be uh, relevant to our interests here going forward. Near Solengar Nither for Evoger is the debut full-length album from Dawn, and this is this is one of my all-time favorite extreme metal records. It's one of my favorite black metal records, and I think overall, this is one of the more entertaining records to show up on this exploration so far. I think there's a lot we could say about this record. I don't want to go on forever about it, but I would say this is one of few truly essential additions to defining what melodic black metal is, and especially in the Swedish style. That isn't to say there's a lot like this record, but that it learned a lot of the lessons that melodic death metal did early on, and then repurposed that into a black metal style. And the way they'd put it is not necessarily that it was just black death metal, but that there was elements of heavy metal, thrash, even alternative and classical music and classical guitar into their sound. I think that that makes sense when you go back and listen to it. There's a lot more than just black metal or just death metal of the time going in there, but they were conscious of it. They were conscious of it being a commercialized and commodified thing, and they did their best to not sound like just another Entombed. That's what everyone else was doing. I think that's pretty admirable because they probably could have pulled it off with their original style and probably been a little bit more popular. Not that they weren't. Also, I found it interesting in an interview with the guitarist Frederick Soderberg. Uh, he specifically says that Henke's vocals were, and some of the aspects of the music were influenced by Eucharist and Sentence in terms of changing the style of the vocals and to sound like something different. And that's always something that you intuitively kind of hear and you see the transition in their style, but to have them put it into words and explain that, yeah, a band like Sentenced, people took notice of what they were doing. And when Eucharist showed up, people took notice of what was innovative about that. And it sort of justifies a lot of the comments I made earlier talking about Eucharist and Sentenced, in that they were important to this style and anyone who was paying attention to black and death metal at the time. There's something to be said about Necropolis Records. I think that's pretty interesting, how that went down and how the original version of it is not necessarily being put out there these days. And then there's some other trivia here if you're interested in that. I'm a huge fan of this record. Obviously, this is one of my favorite bands in the sort of black metal sphere, and I think this is pretty. Like again, this is an essential release for our discussion. So we won't talk about Swordmaster a lot, but they are fondly remembered from where they started. Um, it's hard to not talk about the music here because they did other things that were much more popular. But this is a band started by two folks, and one of them was John Nodvight's brother Emil. Basically, he had played in Ophthalmia at the same time, but eventually focused on this band, and their style changed from melodic black death metal to melodic death thrash metal of the late 90s style, which is not my favorite thing. And then eventually they became Death Stars, which were popular starting in 2000, but I have no recollection or interest in that. Um, this tape itself, again, this is not going to be that interesting. It is an instrumental demo. There's no singing on it, and I think it just has two performers on it. One of them being Matthias Eliasson of Malicious Decay and Sarcastic. This shows their general capability as musicians. It shows some sophisticated dissection influenced sound, and it is a preamble as we move towards their mini LP, which is sort of their best remembered by the underground release at the time. So we're not going to cover a ton of things by this band because their style changed very quickly, but I thought this was a kind of an interesting thing to listen to. That's about it. Another non-essential release is this Fredrikstad, Norway-based quartet Carpathian Full Moon. This is a dark metal band. It's a gothic rock influenced black doom metal band. It's whatever you want to call it for the time. At a time where most of avant-garde music's releases, the Italian label, were either unpredictable or entirely unique, this band was less impressive. They were a little bit jumbled and decent in this style. I think that the fact that an album like Dark Metal by Bethlehem came out that same year kind of negated what this was doing rhythmically as well as in terms of its leads. And I think that if you're a fan of what Samael was doing at the time with Ceremony of Opposites, this feels like the kitchen sink by comparison. But there are some very obvious dark wave and gothic rock influences on this record that make it an interesting curio if you're interested in gothic metal. The reason that I mention it here is because it is labeled as melodic black metal by a lot of people over the years, and it's important that we say, no, this is not what that is. This is much more of a dark metal, a gothic metal, or a black doom metal band if you want to. But I think making that distinction here and having examples of it will prepare us for maybe avoiding a lot of records we wouldn't have to talk about in the future, as long as we understand this isn't really melodic black metal or black metal at all in most respects. I would call this the 1.5 demo from Algaion. This Heosphoros ho proi antelon is basically they re-recorded the first two songs from the 1993 demo along with two new songs in the same production values, which are very bare bones and include a drum machine which is programmed a little bit better this time. They're a little bit better at what they're doing. It sounds a little bit more clear, but generally this is kind of basement level demo with very limited, like maybe a 4-track recording or less. I don't know. Basically, if you're a fan of Greek black metal and want something that is very primitive and has a unique style of rhythm guitar work, I think that this, as a Swedish band, is an interesting standout. Otherwise, of course, this is related to Octonomos, and that makes it a little bit more interesting, but we kind of want to get to the debut full-length album to see how this all pans out in a little bit more of a professional setting, because I think that's when this becomes more interesting. So it is kind of thrilling to finally start hitting upon records that I really love, and I think 1994 will bring about just a few more of those overall in this headspace. But there are a few that I think that I've spent as much time with beyond the Dawn's debut as Finis Malorum, I think because this gives us some different rhythmic approaches to songs that would be on their classic 1996 debut full-length, while also showing the development where they sort of worked out some of their death metal influences and created these very sophisticated, almost Eucharist style songs for this EP. And it makes for one of the most sophisticated dual guitar rhythm arrangements available at the time. I think that this is a very strong atmospheric sense of movement, and the way the drums are produced and performed really add to that. And we really get the signature of Sacramentum arriving and the flair of the performers here on this EP, which is presented without remaster. Thankfully, it always sounded great, and it sounded better when they didn't touch it. So a testament to Dan Svano's skills and the band's own vision, but also probably a record you're going to love if you are interested in seeing where bands like Eucharist and a few others continued to play into the standard of the time, and how black metal bands took that seriously as they continued to develop their craft. I won't harp on it too much longer. I would say this is an essential record. It has a lot of style and personality, and just one of my favorite bands overall. I think it's just endlessly interesting topic to uh, know everything about a group like this because they're so head and shoulders above a lot of what else is out there and was out there at the time. Yeah, I think I won't geek out too much more than that. Give it a deeper listen and spend some more time with this. It might seem chaotic at first. Might seem cold and flat, or the drum sound might be a little bit strange to start. But once you know the music and you're able to follow along with it with confidence, I think there's just this brilliant style of presentation that would change dramatically as they worked it out over the next couple of years. So I like both versions of this band, and this one has its own unique qualities that are inspiring, I think. So yes, we've worked through the giant chunk of Swedish bands here. We touched upon Norway and what that and whatnot otherwise, but as we work through March through June releases, we'll cover a little bit more of the globe in general. We'll see everything from Greece to Norway and back again, and maybe even some United States bands if they make the cut. So not a lot to say otherwise. We've already kind of glossed over the general sense of 1994, and we'll continue to see the year um, have breakthroughs otherwise, and that'll kind of give us as much momentum as there will be two more parts to 1994, and we'll get to that as in about a week.